There's a level in Icycle which has a spider, house and a tree in it, and that's actually a homage to its earliest influence, called Daredevil Dennis, made in 1984, I think it was, for the BBC Micro. And this was the computer that my dad had, BBC B. And obviously years had passed and I did the Atari ST, then the Amiga. There was something called Amos on the Amiga. It was like a Visual Basic that allowed you to manipulate bitmaps and samples and put them together into your own game. So I kind of learnt my first bit of Visual Basic there. And that kind of led to collaboration with Reece Millidge on a game called Odyssey, which we took around to Psygnosis and Bitmap Brothers and got rejected on both counts. We ended up with Audiogenic and they published it in 1995. Prior to that, one of the experiments in Amos was something called Motorman, which was my version of Daredevil Dennis, where you'd ride over terrain and you'd hit a bus or something like that and you'd fly off in exactly the same way that you did in Daredevil Dennis. It was such a simple mechanic because it didn't require any enemies or moving obstacles, it was just static screens, it was nice and easy. And then art college happened. I went through a phase of building shacks and setting fire to them, but then I had to get a job. I ended up in animated commercials in London and worked for various studios, freelance, and then worked for Nexus Productions, everything from feature film intros, commercials, music promos. And then I had the idea about 11, 12 years ago to work on a series of illustrations, but in an interactive way. The reason an Ice Age setting was chosen was simply because of the technology at the time. 12 years ago, you couldn't animate full vector animations in a web browser where they're really chugging. And so frozen imagery was absolutely ideal. But a dog and a bike just didn't cut it. So I went for something quite different. I went for vulnerability. And that's kind of what I found in Dennis. Middle-aged man, losing his hair. And the reason the hero is naked is simply to maximize empathy in that environment. It makes sense to choose a hero who you sympathise, empathise with, and in this case it's the freezing cold. The moped wasn't quite right, using a bike which was a much more endearing form of transport because you can make it a kid's bike. She kind of humiliated him further. So it kind of got into the trend of humiliating Dennis. I needed a collectible that was part of this frozen world, and so the frozen bubbles came into play. And a lot of these ideas just came through hunting around on the web. Useless objects such as missiles and radars and functional things that no longer had a purpose now that the human race had passed. Hulk-size great wave made for a great starting point because obviously that's a moving object. And if that's not moving, it's clear that it's frozen in time. So once the game was finished, it kind of needed an introduction to how the world of Icycle came about. And so I had to establish, maybe 10-15 seconds that the Earth had frozen and it had left a lone survivor. This was the first idea. Anyway, the second iteration seemed to be a lot clearer and a little less risque. One of the problems with the sequel was that it didn't really establish this. The game assumed that people had played the first game, that he was the last survivor and that he'd come out of a cryogenic pod. He had no clothes, just naturally just didn't have any clothes, and the bike was the only thing available to him. And so that was the setting. And then I had to put a trailer together, and that was probably the easiest bit. A collection of the scenery, several comic deaths, drummed it home what it was about. It's dead simple, isn't it? It's just a platform game. One of my New Year's resolutions was to finish the first game and get it out there. By which point technology had advanced so much that it could handle moving scenery. So that's why the sequel has so much more going on and a lot more variety of play and allowed to put together anything that came into my head. Tyre pump, garage door, an aerosol can, a squeaky door hinge, a log, a bag of coins, a lounge door and some bubbles in a glass were used to create the sound of factory.